Welcome to Hondata Flashpro Training Part 9. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at our knock control. We're going to have a lot to learn, so let's get started. Okay, so let's jump into this video and talk about our knock control we're going to be finding with our Hondata Flashpro. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the earlier generation of ECU types that the Hondata Flashpro supports. These are going to be from the 8th and 9th Gen Civic SIs, the Honda S2000, the R18, TSX, RDX. These are all going to be running the similar or the same type of knock strategy from Honda in them. Now the newer style generation of ECUs from Honda for the 10th Gen Civic SIs, the Accords, the Civic Type Rs, those are going to have a completely different knock routine in them. So what we learn in this video is going to be only applied to the earlier generation of ECUs. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that the knock control from Honda in these older generation ECUs is going to be more of a long-term, slow reaction. It's going to be more for octane purposes, not for performance purposes. So if we're looking at a GM or a Ford or a Subaru, they're going to have instant knock correction if there's a knock event. So they're going to have an instant knock retard. And it's not going to work like that with the Honda. We're going to be looking at how the OEM routine works. It's a little complicated. I'm going to try to break it down as simple as possible so you can see what the tables mean when you look at a calibration file and why Honda utilized this knock control. Now the next thing I'm going to be showing you in this video is how I set up my calibration files that I can effectively bypass this OEM knock strategy and go in and be able to use an open loop style control where I'm going to be going in and figure out my maximum brake torque, looking at knock count and making sure the engine's safe, but I'm not going to be relying on the Honda ECU to make any adjustments for me. So without further wait, let's jump into this video so we can check out how this knock control is going to work. So to really understand the knock control in the Honda ECU, we need to open up our calibration files and really dig into what's going on in the actual file. So if we open up our file, we're going to be seeing that if we scroll down, we're going to see a section that's going to be dedicated to our knock control under the calibration section. And we're going to find that we have a couple different tables here for both low and high cam operation that we have to look at. Now the first table that we're going to be dealing with and we're going to be doing our actual tuning in is going to be what's considered the maximum brake torque timing tables. And these are going to be our normal main spark tables. Are going to be doing our tuning in again. So what we're going to find is the values in here are what Honda considers to be maximum brake torque. It's going to be on the ideal octane that we can run the most spark advance. It's going to give us that optimal torque output from the engine. And that's what these tables will represent. We're also going to find that we have this knock ignition limit table. And if we look at the table, we're going to see that the values are kind of all over the place. We see positive values, negative values. This is going to work in the background in conjunction with that maximum brake torque or main spark timing table. It's going to be used to calculate mathematically what to deliver for spark timing. We're going to be taking a look at that in just a few minutes when we go and look at the math side of how this knock control works. Next, we're going to be finding that we have a knock retard table, and this is going to be specifying how much ignition timing ultimately can pull out based on what it's seeing for this long-term knock factor. So we see the values in here are 14 and 12 degrees. They're pretty high, and that's going to be how much it can actually take out. Now the last table we're going to find here is our knock sensitivity tables. And these are going to be how we're going to be filtering out the background noise that's going to be coming in from our knock sensor. So the values in the table are going to represent a filtration amount. If we lower the values down, the knock sensor will be more sensitive, and if we raise the values, the knock sensor will be less sensitive. Now the values that are in the table already are going to be raised a bit from Hondata in their calibration file, so it's not as sensitive because the stock sensitivity tables are very, very sensitive. So these have been desensitized a little bit already from Hondata. Now that we know the four major tables are going to be dealing with for the knock control, we also have to know a little bit more information so we can understand the bigger picture of how this is all going to fit together. Now, if we look here on our sensors bar or tab on the side of our tuning template we set up, and we scroll down, we're going to be seeing that we have three parameters that are going to be associated with our knock control. First, we're going to find our K level, then our K retard, and then our K control. Now the K level or knock level is going to be associated directly with our sensitivity table. So the value is going to be a percentage it's going to be expressing, and the higher the value it's going to have, the more weighting factor it's going to be showing the ECU that there's more knock activity going on. So what we're going to find is if we raise the threshold in our sensitivity table, our knock control is actually going to decrease. The percentage is going to go down. And if we lower the knock sensitivity table, our K level will increase, and then it's going to be reporting more what it thinks is knock activity going on, and it may just be noise. So this is going to play the first role in calculating what's going on with the engine for the knock control. Next, we're going to be finding that we have this K control, and that's going to be our knock control, and that's going to be a percentage multiplier. And it's going to be based on the theoretical octane levels for what Honda's calibrated the ECU with. So 0% knock control is going to have a 0% weighting factor or multiplying factor, and it's going to be what the Honda would have put into the fuel system when they had the engine on the engine dyno and they were tuning it from the factory, and it would have been 95 octane. So that would have been what they found maximum brake torque with in the main spark timing table. So the values that we see in the main spark timing tables, again, are going to be the maximum brake torque that Honda theoretically has developed, and again, using 95 octane. So our K control at a value of 0 would be using the best octane and being able to use all of the spark timing in the table. Now, when we see our K control go to 100%, that means it has 85 octane in the tank, and it's going to be the worst octane we can put in, and it's going to have the highest multiplier for this knock control going on. So what we're going to see is that our K level or a knock level is going to have an influence. It's going to be calculating into our knock control. So as we drive around and our knock level varies, we're going to see that our knock control can actually go up or down based on how that level and what's going on and how it's reading. So it's going to have an influence in this K control. So the K control is going to be our long-term multiplying factor. They're going to be looking at just in a minute here, and we look in the math side of this and how it calculates it. It's going to be the weighting factor. It's going to be the long-term factor going on. Now we're also going to see, if we scroll down a little bit, we're going to see that we have knock count. And the knock count is going to be how much the ECU is going to be counting every time an actual knock event occurs. So the sensitivity tables are also going to be playing a role in filtering out knock count. So if we have really low values in our knock sensitivity table, we're going to be registering more knock counts. And likewise, if we raise the values, we might filter out all of the knock events completely, even if they're occurring, and we would have little to no knock count going on. And we can also see that the Flashpro is going to register per cylinder knock count. So the K count is going to be looking at all of, or the accumulation of all the knock counts in all of the cylinders. And if we look at this particular grouping, it's going to be cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's going to tell us how many knock counts occurred on what cylinder. And if we go back through a data log, we can actually trace back and pinpoint the exact location where a knock event occurred. We also are able to go in and change our spark timing per cylinder. If we see one cylinder that's really sensitive, it has maybe a lot of knock going on, we can actually detune just a single cylinder or 2 cylinders and leave the rest alone. So it's going to be another strategy we can keep in place. So now that we understand kind of how this works, let's take a look at the mathematical formula that goes on to figure out the knock control. So what we're going to find here is that Honda set up a relatively simple mathematical formula to calculate how the knock retard is going to be applied. That's going to be that other thing that we haven't talked about that was in our sensor tab on the side. So we talked about the K level, the K control, but that K retard or knock retard we left out because this is where the knock retard actually comes into play here. So we're going to be finding that our knock retard is going to be equal to our maximum brake torque from that main spark timing table. It's going to be plus our knock ignition limit, and then it's going to be adding to whatever the knock control plus our knock retard value is, and it's going to be then equaling how much knock retard we're going to have. So it sounds really complicated, but let's break this down so it's really simple. So let's go ahead and make our entire ignition timing table, or maximum spark table, maximum brake torque spark table, all values of 20. So we're going to make this very simple. So we're going to take the whole table, we're going to make it 20. And then we're going to go into our knock ignition limit table, and we're going to make all of those values 4 degrees. So we're going to have our maximum brake torque table or spark time table at 20. Our ignition limit table here is going to be at 4 degrees. And what we're going to do is in our knock retard table, we're going to make those values all 12 degrees. So looking at this, we're going to have these just very generic tables filled with all the same values. We're going to be looking at a knock control of 50% to make this really simple. So our knock level as we're driving around is going to be manipulating that K control, and it's going to be equal to 50%. So if we start to plug some numbers in here, if we have 20 degrees in our maximum spark timing table and we have 4 degrees in our knock ignition limit table, and then we have 12 degrees in our knock retard table, but our K control is 0.5 or 50%. When we add all this up in this equation, we're going to see that it's actually going to have a knock retard now of negative 2 degrees, and it's going to ultimately deliver 18 degrees of ignition timing. Now, this doesn't mean that a knock event actually occurred. This just means that over time, it's calculating this, and based on what we've programmed in the knock ignition limit table here, it's going to want to go ahead and reduce the ignition timing so it can avoid knock from occurring. Now, what would happen here is if we had a K control of a value of 0, if we had the best octane possible in the tank, we would find that it might try to add some ignition timing or advance it a little bit, because our knock retard would then be multiplied by 0, which would be 0, and then 20 degrees plus 4 degrees then mathematically would give us 24 degrees. So it would actually have more ignition advance, and our knock retard would be 0. So it's a fairly simple system, and it's going to be taking a while for that K control to populate itself and learn. Usually after you flash the ECU, it's going to take a couple minutes before it starts to come down. It usually starts at a high value, a high multiplier, and then settles down to about 0.5 to 0.55. That's going to be a typical K control you're going to see in your ECU. Now, if we went in and changed our ignition limit table, or knock ignition limit table, to values of 8. So we have our main spark timing table, our maximum brake torque timing, at 20 degrees. Now we've changed our knock ignition limit table to 8 degrees, and then we went into our knock retard, we left that at 12, and our K control was still at 50%, but all we've done is increase our knock ignition limit by another 4 degrees. What we're going to find is that our delivered ignition timing now is going to be 22 degrees, and we're going to have no knock retard at all. It's going to be 0. And that could still, we could still be having maybe knock going on, but our K control or knock control weighting factor or multiplier hasn't increased yet. It takes some time to increase. So what we're going to find is, as we drive around on a stock Hondata file, if we look at the knock retard, we might find that it's kicking in. It might pull a couple degrees out here and there as you're driving in part throttle, or if you get into full throttle situations, and that's just going to be how this system dynamically works. It's always going to be moving the ignition timing around to suit that knock control model. It's fairly simple once you see how it's all stripped down and what you're going to look at it in most basic terms. But if we plug the values back into the table, if we have our spark timing values all over the place, and then we have our knock ignition limit table all over the place, and our knock retard and our K control can vary, we're going to finding that our ignition timing is going to be chaotic at best to try to figure out what's going on. Now, we obviously can look at our knock retard at any given time in the data log and figure out if it has some knock retard, if it's kicking in, but we want to take that out of the equation. So what I do is I go into my knock ignition limit table and I set the values to something very high, something 30, 40, 50 degrees. And by doing that, I've added a huge buffer into this knock control, and I've effectively told it, I don't care what the knock control goes to, I don't care what my knock retard table is, I'm going to basically bypass all that. And the values that are in my main spark timing table are going to be the maximum brake torque timing. So I'm going to be tuning those tables so that I'm going to be finding that maximum brake torque myself. And that's going to be what we find on an older K-Pro or Hondata S300. That's going to be what we're used to in our tuning process. We're not going to be used to working with this knock control kind of kicking in and weighing everything and making it harder to tune. So my strategy is to go ahead and raise up my knock ignition limit table drastically. But what I'm going to find is when I do that, it's also going to be advancing the ignition timing against my main spark timing table. So I'm going to go in, if I set my knock ignition limit table high, such as 20, 30 degrees positive over the whole table, I might go into my main spark timing table based on whatever cam angle I'm operating at, and I'll subtract maybe 6 to 8 degrees out all over the table right off the bat. And then what I'm going to do is drive it and go through my normal process of doing my tuning. And I'm going to be watching my knock count in all my cylinders and my overall knock count and making sure that I don't get knock. Now, if I start to see knock, I know that that could be something going on, and I'm going to go in and then detune the areas that it's going to be showing me knock count. Now, again, the knock count is going to be looking at and weighing on the knock sensitivity table. So if you see that it's always getting a knock count in a certain area, and if you pull the ignition timing down and you keep reducing it 5, 6, 8 degrees and it's still showing knock count, then you're getting noise in that location. And what you're going to have to do is go into your knock sensitivity table in that same RPM and load range and then raise it up. Go in values of maybe 10, 20, 30%, and then flash it and then try it and see if by raising your knock sensitivity if you're able to eliminate that false knock count that's going on. So my method of tuning Flashpro is to effectively bypass the OEM knock logic, set my knock ignition limit table high, and then go in and manually set up and tune my spark timing tables as I would with any other standalone system or the older S300 and K Pro. And then I'm simply going to be looking again at that knock count, and then I'm going to be able to manipulate what I need to in my spark timing table to keep the engine happy and also so that it's going to be making power. So I suggest that you go in and tune your ignition timing tables on a dyno if at all possible, so that you're able to look at the cause and effect. So as you bump the ignition timing in, see if you're making any more power. Now, because most of the engines are going to be high compression and you're going to be pushing them already with the octane you're going to be running, you're already going to be spark limited. So you're going to be pulling back a lot of ignition timing, especially in a forced induction application, and you don't want to get greedy. So it's better that it's safer that you go on a chassis dyno to be able to develop your ignition timing tables. Now, you're definitely going to be able to do it off the dyno if you want, but you're going to have to be relying on those sensitivity tables and pulling out the ignition timing and go through that process and making sure you're conservative with your ignition timing and always watching your knock count. So this is pretty straightforward to do. It's definitely confusing the way that these tables all kind of work together, that you can get your knock retard kicking in, and then when there's actually really no knock occurring, and it's much different than a lot of other ECUs. So if you're used to tuning with a Subaru, a GM, a Ford, or if you're working with a standalone system and you're used to having knock retard applied when there's actual knock event, that's not how it's going to work in a Honda ECU, and it's definitely complicated and definitely irritating when you can't get the spark timing delivered even if you have no knock going on. So hopefully it's very clear how this knock control is going to work, and you're going to be able to utilize the method that I showed in this video to go in and do your tuning process, and you're still going to be able to see if it's knocking. You're just not going to have to rely on the Honda ECU kicking in and pulling ignition timing out unnecessarily when we don't need it to be.